Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Outside Alan, not to be confused with Indoor Alan or Underwater Alan. In the Star Wars galaxy, the massive ships we see are generally built for military purposes. This means that they are designed to operate for limited periods of time. There's X amounts of fuel, ammunition, and other type of supplies on board that need to be replenished on a regular schedule. These weren't sleeper ships that were built to function for several generations, with self-sustainability being the focus of every aspect of the design. These were gigantic warships, and every inch of their hull was constructed for either protection or destruction of the enemy. Now, a lot of people ask me, hey Alan, why did the Empire lose so quickly after the Battle of Endor? Surely it would take many years, if not decades, for the rebels to take out the more than 25,000 ISDs still left under Imperial control. Well, one of the reasons why the Empire lost was that the Imperial-class Star Destroyer was one of the most resource-intensive ships in the entire galaxy. Once Palpatine died, then the various Imperial factions started fighting amongst one another. The logistical network that kept these massive Star Destroyers operating at full strength collapsed as well, which meant that many of the Emperor's finest Star Destroyers were operating at half strength, with half the weapons and half the manpower needed to be a fully functioning vessel. Once Rebel commanders realized that many of these once mighty ISDs were operating at half capacity, the tide began to turn, and soon it was Imperial captains and their Star Destroyers that were running and hiding. A very unlikely change of circumstances that no one really saw coming. Another huge loss for the Empire was its orbital shipyards, like the one found on Fondor. These gigantic structures were capable of refitting and resupplying multiple Imperial-class Star Destroyers within a day. Without proper infrastructure in place, like the Fondor shipyards, it could take days for a Star Destroyer to be resupplied via smaller shuttles and transport ships that had to ferry goods from ground-based warehouses. This is why one of the key design aspects that many military leaders wanted from even the largest warships was the ability for them to land on planets with relatively normal gravity. This would give ship captains a huge tactical advantage when it comes to loading and unloading the supplies or even soldiers and vehicles on their ship. And so today we're going to take a look at some of the largest Star Wars vessels that had this capability of landing in atmosphere and then taking off. The Acclamator-class assault ship is one of the few ships on this list that was purpose-designed for this type of mission. At 752 meters in length, this vessel could hold up to 16,000 clone troopers on board, along with all of their equipment, walkers, and gunships. In many ways, these ships weren't all that different from landing ship tanks that were used during the invasion of Normandy to disgorge large amount of troops and Sherman tanks and other things onto the beaches of Normandy that the smaller Higgin boats couldn't really handle. Ships designed for these type of assault landings usually can be identified by a massive central ramp that is built to allow as many things to disembark on board as quickly as possible. The Acclamator class also had shielding and a decent amount of built-in hull armor, and it also had 24-point defense cannons on it. This gave this massive troop transport some protection and allowed it to make landings under light enemy fire. Although, as we see during the Battle of Ryloth, they weren't really designed to take on heavy anti-aircraft fire and were quite vulnerable to the Separatist ground-based J-1 proton cannon. All it took was one strike to a rear engine, and one of the Acclamators during the battle quickly lost power and crashed into the surface of Ryloth. This essentially wiped out a third of the entire Republic invasion force, and the Separatists didn't even hit the Acclamator repulsor lift generator, which is located in the tail of the ship. You see, most ships in the Star Wars galaxy use repulsor lifts for in-atmosphere flight. Instead of generating thrust and fighting gravity, repulsors push against a planet's mass and actually use that gravity to keep it afloat. Not really exactly sure how they achieved this from a scientific point of view, but this is how many of the massive ships on our list are even able to stay afloat when entering a planet's atmosphere. Any interruption of the repulsor lift, as we see with the Acclamator, can result in catastrophic failure, which is why entering the atmosphere of a planet with any large vessel can be a huge risk. After the Battle of Ryloth, you would rarely see this type of cavalier maneuver by an Acclamator-class assault ship. Instead, for the rest of the war, most of these transports would stay in orbit where they could deploy gunships full of troopers from a safe distance. Then these ships would just stay on station and coordinate troop movements from orbit or provide fire support with their turbolasers. And so the only time the Acclamators would actually land on the surface of a planet would be after the area was completely secured and all of the anti-aircraft emplacements were destroyed. Now, after the Acclimator-class assault ship, which was really just a glorified transport, came the Venator-class Star Destroyer. This was a purpose-built warship. At 1,137 meters in length, it could also enter the atmosphere of a planet, land on the ground for resupply, and take off once again. During the Clone Wars, we actually see massive terminals on Coruscant that are designed for these Venators. They sort of remind me of airport gates or even cruise ship gates. These massive structures dwarf these kilometer-long vessels and could give Republic crews access to the many gates and doors on a Venator class, which is important because the Venator was more of an assault carrier than it was a battleship, and it held a huge complement of starfighters on board that needed a lot of resupply and equipment. Because the Venator could carry in excess of 400 starfighters, many of which had hyperdrives, the carrier itself rarely had to get close to a battlefield or a planet it was targeting. This is why a Venator-class Star Destroyer will also rarely enter the atmosphere of a planet during a combat mission. And when it does, it moves even slower than the Acclimator class, which had a max in-atmosphere speed of around 1,200 kilometers per hour, or for our American viewers, about the speed a LS Swap GMC van has to be going at sea level to break the sound barrier. It's impossible. You can't get an LS Swap van that fast. The Venator-class Star Destroyer could only move at around 975 kilometers per hour, which made this 1 kilometer long vessel a really large and slow target to hit. In 21 BBY, during the Battle of Quell, the Venator-class Star Destroyer Liberty took heavy fire from multiple Separatist frigates. The repulsors on the Venator were far better shielded, and so the ship managed to stay afloat for a much longer time than the Acclimator class, although it eventually lost lift and would go crashing into the ground as well. These grapes are so good. Next up, we have the MC-80 Star Cruiser line from the Mon Calamari shipyards. These were very unique ships for several different reasons. First, no two MC-80 Star Cruiser was built the same. They were all unique, and they could range from 1,200 meters to around 1,400 meters. And the bulbous shapes on them were also very random. But perhaps what makes a Mon Cala ship even more interesting is the fact that many of them were originally civic buildings that were fitted with shields, weapons, thrusters, and hyperdrives and used to escape the Imperial occupation of Mon Cala. So yeah, these ships not only could fly in atmosphere, they could literally rise out of the ocean as well. And so even though these Mon Cala cruisers were not designed for military purposes, they had exceptionally strong hulls that were designed to withstand the pressure of the deep ocean, making them far stronger than a space-faring vessel. This is where the MC-80 Star Cruiser gets its legendary hull strength. Combined with a smart redundant shield system that recharged rapidly, the MC-80s were able to even hold their own against the Imperial-class Star Destroyer. Now, since the Mon Cala's homeworld was a water planet, this meant that the MC-80 wasn't really designed to land on land, but it could land in the water and float like a large boat or ship. At 1.6 kilometers in length, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer is the first of our mile-long atmospheric ships. This large battleship, which was designed for exchanging violent broadsides with other similar ships, could easily float above the ground of a planet using its extremely powerful repulsor lifts. Having this massive ship float above a potentially rebellious city was all a part of the Empire's Tarkin Doctrine military policy, which tried to create obedience through the threat of force. As we see over Jeddah City, right before its destruction, the sight of a massive ISD was definitely awe-inspiring, but it didn't prevent the most hardened rebels from continuing their attacks on the Empire. What is interesting about the Imperial-class Star Destroyer's design is that compared to its predecessor, the Venator-class Star Destroyer, which had landing struts, the ISD hull, for some reason, didn't seem to have those same type of retractable landing struts, which meant that it most likely couldn't land on the ground. It should be mentioned, though, in 18 BBY, Tarkin landed his unidentified warship on a group of protesters on the planet of Gorum. They were, protesting something. I don't remember what happened exactly. Tarkin was known for using an Imperial-class Star Destroyer as his command vessel, but we can't completely verify that's what he used in this incident. But judging by the massive amount of casualties that occurred from this landing incident, we can only assume that an ISD basically belly flapped the landing and didn't use landing struts, because landing struts take a lot less surface area and would have limited the amount of casualties. The ISD's in-atmosphere max speed was similar to the Venator's at 975 kilometers per hour. The Lucre class battleship is another entry on our list that didn't start off its life as a military vessel, but as a bulk freighter. This circular vessel had a diameter of over 3,000 meters in length and was all about carrying as much material as possible and still being able to fly in atmosphere and land so that it could deliver its goods. But with a top speed of around 500 kilometers per hour, its repulsor lifts were clearly designed more for safety than speed. As far as landing goes, though, we only know for sure that the central control sphere can land and take off from the ground, as seen during the Battle of Geonosis. Whether the rest of the freight body can actually do this as well, we just don't know. Although that would make the transfer of goods and military equipment much easier for the Trade Federation on worlds with less than developed infrastructure, which is really common for the Trade Federation because it mostly operated in the less developed Outer Rim territories. The Executor-class Star Dreadnought was a ridiculous ship. At 19 kilometers long, it was basically a flying city. It was so long that when it landed, the landing struts most likely had to take into account the curvature of the planet. Now, just like other ships on this list, any interruption to the Star Dreadnought's repulsors will cause it to go crashing into the surface of the planet, just like how the Ravager did during the Battle of Jakku. Although, in all fairness, it was pulled to the ground by a New Republic Starhawk's massive tractor beam. So how do we know an Executor-class Star Dreadnought can actually land and then fly into space from the ground? Well, let me tell you the story about the first Executor-class Star Dreadnought, which was built in secret. It was called the Lusanka. This was the sister ship of the Executor, which the entire class is named after. This was named after this... And it was a sister ship of the Executor, which is what the class of the ship is named after. Now, the Lusanka was built and then it was hidden beneath the surface of the planet of Coruscant. Locals were told that it was just new infrastructure that was a part of the larger planetary defense shield. After the Lusanka was hidden, the city was simply rebuilt over the top of it. The Imperials who moved into these very luxurious neighborhoods and spent their life savings on these apartments had no idea that they had just built a home over Emperor Palpatine's escape vessel. Palpatine never got to use the Lusanka. He would die the first time around on board the second Death Star. In Legends, Imperial intelligence officers who were using the ship as a secret prison would take control of the Lusanka and try to use it to escape the New Republic. When the Super Star Dreadnought emerged from beneath the surface of the planet, it caused massive amounts of damage. Over 259 square kilometers of the surface of the planet was destroyed, and this event killed millions of people. So there you have it, guys. 6 very impressive starships that can not only fight in space, but they can actually land on a planet and then take off once again, giving you a lot of different options when it comes to resupplying or assaulting a planet. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,